She was just a passenger on Flight 227. No cameras followed her. No one knew her name. She blended into the crowd like hundreds of others moving through the airport that morning. Coffee in hand, eyes tired, thoughts elsewhere. Flight 227 was simply a step between where she was and where she needed to be. The airport buzzed with its usual noise. Suitcases rolled over shiny floors. Announcements echoed through the terminal. Some people hurried, others lingered. For her, it was an ordinary day, wearing an ordinary face. She found her seat near the middle of the plane, slid her bag under the seat in front of her, and fastened her seatbelt like she had done 100 times before. Row 18, Seat B. The passenger beside her nodded politely and went back to his phone. Across the aisle, a young mother struggled with a crying toddler. A few rows ahead, a group of college students laughed loudly, excited about a vacation that had just begun. The flight. Attendants moved smoothly, greeting passengers, checking overhead bins, repeating safety instructions most people barely listened to. She listened anyway. Not because she was afraid of flying, she wasn't, but because she had a habit of paying attention. The exits, the oxygen masks, the life vests. She watched quietly, without knowing why. Years ago, someone had told her that awareness mattered. That stuck with her. When the plane began to taxi, a familiar feeling settled in her chest. The gentle hum of the engines, the slight vibration through the seat. Outside the window, the runway stretched ahead, long and ordinary, like nothing unexpected could ever happen on it. The plane lifted off smoothly. Applause came from a few passengers, a tradition that never quite disappeared. The city below shrank into patterns of lights and lines. Clouds closed in, soft and white. Seatbelt signs stayed on a little longer than usual, but no one seemed concerned. She relaxed, pulling out a book she'd been meaning to finish for months. The first 30 minutes passed quietly. The captain's voice came over the speaker. Calm, confident routine. Weather ahead was normal. Slight turbulence expected, but nothing serious. Estimated arrival on time. Everything about Flight 227 felt predictable, until it didn't. It started with a small tremor. Not enough for alarm. Just a subtle shake that made the overhead lights flicker for a split second. Conversations paused. Someone laughed nervously. The plane steadied, and life moved on. Then came another jolt, stronger this time. The laughter stopped. The seatbelt sign flashed back on, accompanied by the familiar chime. A flight attendant's voice followed, polite but firm, and asking everyone to remain seated. The plane dipped slightly, then rose again, like a boat riding an unseen wave. She closed her book. Outside the window, the sky no longer looked calm. Darker clouds gathered, thick and uneven, the kind you don't notice from the ground but feel deeply. When you're inside them, the turbulence increased. A tray table snapped shut somewhere behind her. The toddler began crying again, louder this time. A glass rolled off a tray and shattered on the floor. The engine sounded different, not weaker, not louder, just different. Her heartbeat quickened. She noticed things others didn't. The way one flight attendant gripped a seat for balance, longer than necessary. The quick glance two crew members exchanged. Silent. Just brief, but tense. The way the captain didn't speak when turbulence normally would have passed. Minutes dragged. The shaking became uneven. Sharp drops followed by stiff climbs. Luggage compartments rattled. People stopped pretending everything was fine. A man across the aisle whispered, "This isn't normal." She swallowed hard but stayed still. Then the announcement came, not from the captain, but from the first officer. His voice was controlled, but there was a thin edge to it that couldn't be hidden. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a temporary issue. Please remain calm. Our crew is handling the situation." Temporary issue. Those words lingered like smoke. The plane dropped suddenly. Just a few feet, but enough to make screams break through the cabin. Oxygen masks did not fall, but some passengers clutched their armrests as if they were holding onto the world itself. Her mind raced, but panic didn't fully take over. Instead, something else surfaced. Memory. Years ago, before life took her in a different direction, she had trained for moments like this, not as a pilot flying commercial jets, not as a hero, but as someone who once believed preparation mattered more than fear. She hadn't thought about that part of her life in a long time. She never imagined it would matter again. Another violent shake threw the plane sideways. The lights dimmed briefly, then returned. The sound of the engines sputtered, only for a moment, but enough for everyone to notice. Silence followed. Not calm silence. The heavy, suffocating silence of people waiting for reassurance that didn't come. The captain still hadn't spoken. A flight attendant hurried toward the front, her face pale. Another stayed frozen near the galley, one hand pressed against the wall, breathing shallowly. That's when she knew. Something was wrong, very wrong. She tightened her seatbelt and took a slow breath, forcing her hands to stop shaking. Her heart felt as if it were pounding against her ribs, desperate to escape. Around her, fear spread quietly, through widened eyes, whispered prayers, trembling hands. She looked at the cockpit door. Closed, guarded, ordinary. But behind it, something had changed. Flight 227 was no longer just another plane in the sky. And she was no longer just a passenger. But she didn't stand up yet. Not yet. Because sometimes the most important moments begin long before anyone realizes they've started. The next announcement never came. Minutes passed, but the cockpit remained silent. No calm voice, no reassurance. Only turbulence and the sound of metal struggling against air. Fear thickened inside the cabin like smoke. People sensed it, not through words, but through absence. Then the scream came, not from panic but from realization. A flight attendant emerged from the front, eyes wide, lips trembling. She tried to smile, tried to look in control, but her hands betrayed her. They shook as she gripped the intercom, pressed the button, and then stopped. She didn't speak. She simply set the phone back and leaned against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor. That was the moment everything changed. Passengers stood up despite the seatbelt sign glowing red. A man shouted for answers. Someone began praying loudly. The toddler's cries blended with the rising chaos. Oxygen masks suddenly dropped from the ceiling, bouncing and swaying like ghosts. The plane lurched violently. Screams filled the cabin. She was just a passenger on Flight 227, she thought, but not anymore. She stood. The shaking nearly threw her back into her seat, but she steadied herself, one hand on the overhead bin, the other gripping a seat back. Her voice came out loud, clearer than she expected. "Everyone sit down, buckle your seatbelts." People looked at her, some confused, some desperate. In fear, humans cling to confidence wherever it appears, and her voice carried it. A flight attendant turned toward her. "Ma'am, please, tell me what's happening in the cockpit," she said. The attendant hesitated, then whispered. The captain collapsed. The first officer tried to manage, but her voice broke. "We lost control. He's not responding." The words hit harder than turbulence. Collapsed. Not responding. Her chest tightened, but her mind sharpened. She had trained once, flight theory, simulators, emergency procedures, not for commercial jets. And not like this, but enough to understand essentials, enough to know that every second mattered. "Open the cockpit door," she said. "We can't." "You can," she snapped back, firm but not cruel. "And you must. I can help." The attendant studied her face. In that split second, trust was a gamble, but doing nothing was worse. She nodded. The cockpit door opened. The smell of burnt electronics filled the air. Warning alarms screamed. Lights blinked red and orange. The captain lay slumped in his seat, unconscious. The first officer was barely holding the controls. His breathing labored, blood at his temple. Relief and terror crossed his face when he saw her. "I can't," he whispered. "Controls failing." She stepped in, heart pounding so hard she thought it might drown out the alarms. "Move," she said gently. He didn't argue. She took the seat. Hands on the controls. The aircraft screamed in protest, dipping dangerously. Her instincts kicked in. Training resurfaced. Angles, thrust, balance. She corrected slowly, not sharply, not desperately. "Easy, easy," she whispered, as if speaking to a living thing. Behind the cockpit door, 275 lives waited. Sweat blurred her vision. Her arms ached. Every alert sounded like a countdown to disaster. She forced air into her lungs, steadying herself the way she had been taught. Flight 227, this is... Her voice caught. She swallowed. This is a passenger. We need emergency guidance. Silence crackled. Then a voice responded. Clear, firm, controlled. Flight 227, we hear you. Help! Tears burned her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Guided step by step, she followed instructions, repeating them aloud, grounding herself in action instead of fear. Adjust altitude. Stabilize pitch, reduce speed. Every correction felt like balancing on a knife's edge. The plane stopped dropping. Not smoothly, but enough. In the cabin, the screams faded into stunned silence as passengers felt it stabilize. People held hands. Some cried quietly. Others stared at the ceiling, afraid to hope. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, land came into view. A long grey strip beneath broken clouds. You're doing great, the voice said. Stay with us. You can do this. She nodded, even though no one could see her. Her hands shook, her muscles burned. Fear clawed at her chest, but something stronger held it back. Purpose. The runway rushed toward them. The plane hit hard, a violent bounce, another correction. Tires screamed but stayed firm. Then they slowed. Completely. Silence followed. For one single heartbeat, no one spoke, breathed, or moved. Then the cabin exploded into tears, screams, laughter, prayers, and applause. She slumped forward, hands slipping from the controls. It was over. Emergency crews rushed in. The captain was taken away. The first officer survived. One by one, passengers stepped onto the runway, alive. When reporters asked for her name, she gave it. When they called her a hero, she shook her head. I just couldn't stay seated, she said quietly. Because she wasn't just a passenger on Flight 227. She was the reason 275 people went home.